Here are my credentials, and here are my credentials, and you need to vote this thing down. And here's why. And unfortunately, she was not as convincing as we would have hoped at that time. But one of the reasons was that we later found out this company was pumping the maximum allowable campaign contributions into the coffers of a number of people who were elected at that time, including the president of the city council who was running the meeting and shutting down Mary Booth's testimony. And so it passed. It passed with 2 votes of opposition. And it was about 6 months away from opening when an organization in Springfield called Arise for Social Justice, which is a long time described themselves as a poor people's rights organization. There is no way to truly describe Arise in words, to be honest with you. It started around a kitchen table with 4 single moms following the kind of Reagan era cuts to welfare, and just grew from there. And it still exists today. Arise, they respond to whatever is threatening marginalized communities, and they are member-led, member-driven. It's a very unique organization, and they started going around Springfield saying, hey, have people heard about this? Do they understand why this is a threat, why this is a problem? They'd never worked on environmental issues before, but this sort of forced it into the forefront. And at the time, I was involved on the McKnight Neighborhood Council in Springfield. We have 17 neighborhoods. Each neighborhood has a little bit of a neighborhood council that sort of is like a locally, it's not elected office. It's like a neighborhood association, but it gets CDBG funding from the city to kind of advocate for the neighborhood. And they have boards that are elected, by the people that live in the neighborhood. And so, at that time, I was on that board as the youth representative on the McKnight Neighborhood Council, and got connected with Arise and Michael Busey, who was the executive director and one of the co-founders. And other neighborhood councils started getting involved in the initiative and founded, this sort of coalition, ragtag coalition that was called the Springfield Climate, or the Springfield, at the time it was called Stop Toxic Incineration in Springfield. And basically started running around Springfield and kind of running around the Commonwealth, shouting at the top of our lungs about this proposal and why this was such a challenge for Springfield. And that coalition grew to include, really over 100 members, whether it was neighborhood councils, public health organizations, statewide organizations that came in to support us. And it became a real rallying cry for the state to do something. And I remember going that year to a fundraiser for that Deval Patrick was at, and we went to him in a suburb of Springfield. It wasn't actually in Springfield. And said, Governor Patrick, you have to stop this. Only you can stop this. It's got all its local permits. It's got its air permit. We were appealing the air permit, but that wasn't going anywhere. And Governor Patrick issued at that time a moratorium on construction and demolition debris incineration in Massachusetts, and ordered what is now kind of the famous Manomat study. And so we thought, here we are. Wow, 6 months later, we got to Governor Deval Patrick. He said he wasn't going to let this happen. He put the moratorium on. We should be all set. And so we, went back to our lives, and the DEP was doing the Manomat study about, whether this was really environmentally safe. And the company in charge of building this decided they were going to change their fuel source, and they weren't going to do C&D anymore. They were going to do what they called green wood. And that meant they were going to allegedly kind of go around and pick up waste wood from different municipalities and after storms and things like that, but nothing that had been processed, nothing that had been pressure treated. And they would bring that in and burn it for electricity. And so the important thing to understand about this whole proposal was that the money was never really in the electricity generation. It was always in the tax incentives from the Commonwealth. That's what made it profitable. And so they could access tax incentives from the Commonwealth via this virgin waste wood that they called it. And so the proposal was 150 truckloads a day of chipped wood waste, operating 24 hours a day. Its emissions were only slightly better than what was proposed under construction and demolition debris. And the biggest thing, of course, was that it wasn't necessary. There wasn't a shortage of of electricity in the area. There was not an abundance of virgin waste wood that had nowhere to go. There was just no real reason for it other than to make these guys wealthy. And so that kicked off the next 5 years of the campaign. So now we're in, to give you some perspective, we started in 2008-9. We're now in kind of 2010-11, where we had to come back and reactivate the whole initiative and reactivate the whole group and start fighting it. And the change, though, was that the local city council in Springfield had undergone a massive transformation. And that transformation was the introduction of ward representation, which meant that no longer were all the councilors elected at large, elected by the whole city. There were 8 district councilors elected, and there were 5 councilors elected at large. And what that immediately changed was that the city council became, for the very first time in its history, a minority-majority city council. It, for the very first time in its history, had people represented from every part of the city there. And you can imagine that they took a very different look at this type of a project than their predecessors had, who really didn't stand to be impacted by it in the same way that they did and that their constituents did. So the next 5 years of this history is that there were 2 campaigns. There was the campaign to revoke the special permit for the project that had been granted by the previous council, and there was the campaign to eliminate the tax credits at the state level. And both of those things happened. They did revoke the permit, and they did eliminate the tax credits. They did sue over the elimination of their special permit. They've been very well financed this whole time. And they actually were successful in seeing their special permit restored, which was interesting because the lawyers that represented us, which were through the Conservation Law Foundation and sort of in combination with Toxics Action Center, which is now Community Action Works, they said it was just unprecedented for a local body's decision to be overturned by the land court and by the state Supreme Court. So it was very strange that happened. But because the tax credits had been eliminated, they couldn't go forward. And so we counted it as a win. In 2015, we thought we had won again, and we proceeded on about our lives. At this point, I had graduated from high school and then went to college and then gone to work for Rise as an environmental organizer. And it's important to recognize about biomass that biomass kicked off a whole environmental movement in Springfield that had not existed. I mean, Rise really invested resources in this. Other organizations started to invest resources in this. So while this was all happening, now you were seeing the climate action plan get written. Now you were seeing the city council take a much tougher look at polluting industries that came before them for special permits. You saw the language of climate justice start to permeate throughout the city. And so that was all really a happy consequence and side effect of this immediate threat, because it made people wake up to what was really going on around them and why they were seeing the public health outcomes that they were seeing, why they were seeing the environmental outcomes they were seeing, and why cities like Springfield had been targeted for so long. So here we are bouncing along. I decided to run for city council because I was just so, really horrified by the lack of representation that people had seen during the biomass fight, having learned about, what had happened and been so intimately involved in it. Got elected. And when I got elected, all of a sudden there was this new movement in Massachusetts to restore tax credits for biomass. And out of nowhere, all the same guys were back in Springfield, and they still had site control, and they wanted to do it, and they were ready to go. And they announced they were going to break ground. And this was like 3 months after I got elected. I got a call from a reporter who said, "Do you care to comment on the groundbreaking for the biomass incinerator?" And this had never happened before. It has not happened since, but I was just speechless to the reporter. I was like, I'm going to have to call you back. Like, I just hung up on this reporter and had to figure out what was going on. And, I have one more minute for the rest of the story, but the rest of the story is 3 years long because that's how long this has been going on. Essentially, you had to bring everybody back. You had to bring all the same people back. You had to fight the same campaign again, and this time at the state level. And in this is where folks like yourselves, like Interfaith Light and Power, or like people who in the eastern part of the state and farther west from us really have been instrumental, is in moving the state legislature finally away from the idea that we are going to incentivize these tax credits for these types of incinerators, whether it's going to be through municipal light plants or whether it's going to be through the RPS. finally, I think the state has really seen that they cannot do it. But that would not have been possible without folks like you, who helped us mobilize statewide, because the Springfield delegation really couldn't have done it on its own. So that's where we are now. The tax credits have been eliminated once again. They've changed again the strategy, I think, about where they're or how they're gonna distribute tax credits. I will say that I think there's more work to be done there. I mean, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs really needs to actually scrap biomass from the RPS, which they haven't done. But their current proposal would essentially make it very difficult to ever construct something like this. It would make it illegal to construct it in Springfield, and make it very difficult to construct in other parts of the Commonwealth. But there's always more to be done. To answer the question in conclusion, kind of about how we built power, the way we built power was by connecting it to people's lives. We used to go to gatherings in Springfield to present, and the first question that Mike Lambusi, who has since passed away, would ask is, raise your hand if you or someone you know has asthma. And in Springfield, as Pastor said, we were the asthma capital of the world, or of the country, according to the Asthma and Allergy Foundation, by metrics at least, for 3 years. And we're glad that we've dropped down on that list, not only because areas have become more polluted, but because we have become less polluted. And I can talk more about how that happened. We're number 12 now. We would like to not be on the list at all, but we are number 12 instead of number 1. But in Springfield at that time, you would have, 99% of the room's hands were up, and we would say, do you know why? And they would say, well, we never really thought about it. So once you made that connection that the asthma rate was tied to the concentration of pollution, and that this would make that worse, you brought people on board. And that can be challenging because you don't always have that immediate threat, right? So you have to figure out, how do you connect whatever the issue is to the everyday lives of people? Because most people are not sitting around thinking about this. They're sitting around thinking about, depending on their level of affluence, they're sitting around thinking about how they're going to pay their bill, how they're going to deal with the next issue from their kid, in some cases where they're going to get the next meal for their kid, right? And so that person is not sitting around going, let me do a power analysis in my city about who's letting polluters in. They're sitting around saying, how do I get resources? You have to make it connect with them, and that's what we've been successful in doing. So that was a little bit of a ramble. I did try to condense 12 years into 8 or 9 minutes, but I'm sure we can get into more stuff in questions, and that is how we got here.
Oh my God, that is just an incredible story, Jesse. And what a privilege to have somebody who was there as a child, growing up in the movement, and now being in a position of power yourself, and to see the sort of both the power of people rising from the grassroots, and also at the same time, what happens when you have structures at a state or national level that allow the kinds of proposals that, I mean, really, I don't know that it wasted your time, right? Because you built an incredible movement, but that's a lot of work to just to keep a dumb idea out of Springfield.
Well, and that is actually, I gave a speech, not to be political, but Sonia Chang Diaz is a friend of mine. I got to know her when I worked for Don Berwick, when Don Berwick ran for governor. Some of you might be familiar with, we like to call him the governor of Northampton and Amherst, because he did win Northampton and Amherst. But, so I got to know Sonia then, and she came to Springfield when she announced her campaign for governor, and we had a roundtable. And one of the things that I said at that time was, we spend so much time fighting bad decisions by disconnected or easily influenced government actors, that it takes away from the amount of time we should be spending proactively building our communities up and undoing the legacy of really, pollution and environmental racism and so many other negative impacts. So that's a huge problem, right? And the way you fix that is you elect people who are more trustworthy, who are more connected to the issues, who are more connected to their communities, and you hold them accountable, right? And that's the one thing I think that we showed with the movement in Springfield, is people lost their seats over this, right? I mean, people lost their seats on the city council over their support of biomass, and people have to realize that that's going to happen to them if they support projects that hurt their community.
Do you guys have questions for Jesse? I'm going to open it up, and then I have a bunch of analysis I would love to do, which I may or may not have full time for, but this is like the best story. You're welcome to put comments in the chat or questions in the chat as well. Sue says, "What a wonderful story of persistence and agility, changing the small stuff, but always with the main goal in mind." Lots of thank yous for sharing. What kept you from giving up, says Trudy.
Ask me the question one. I'm so sorry.
What,
Okay.
what kept you
What
from
kept us
giving
from
up?
giving up? Well, the solidarity was a big part of not giving up, right? When you have a lot of people around you who can help pick up the pieces, um, that's important to sustaining a campaign like that. And let me be very clear, this was a massive campaign and a massive coalition. I mean, this was by no means just Jesse Letterman or Mike Lambusi or Mary Booth, right? I mean, we had hundreds of people who at the drop of a hat would turn out to hearings, would turn out to phone banks, would turn out to demonstrations. And everybody really played an important role. And that included, folks who were grassroots organizers, that included folks who were doctors, that included folks who were elected officials, that included folks that were just neighbors. So that was a big part of what helped us to not give up. I think the other piece was the real threat. I think that motivated us. I think that you could see, would be, if we had given up and you had seen them build this, which very well could have happened, you would have literally seen a structure erected in the middle of the city of Springfield that would just spew smoke 24/7. I mean, that would physically represent the failure, right, of not stopping this. And so I think that really motivated us in a pretty meaningful way.
Jesse, this is Fred Small. Arise for Social Justice is a 501c3, which means they cannot take partisan political stands. You said that city councilors lost their seats over this, and that is a terrific outcome. I'm wondering if you can talk very briefly about how a movement that is centered in a 501c3 can then influence electoral outcomes without running afoul of the IRS.
Yeah, so if you are raising these issues as the issues in your community, that will move the political dialogue. And this became a major question that voters asked people, right? This became a major vote that people looked at. We have a great local political blog. They're completely independent, completely grassroots, called Western Mass Politics and Insight, which is written by a guy named Matt Safransky, who was just a journalism student who came back to Springfield, where he had grown up from college and was going to law school. He had gotten his BA, he got his undergrad in journalism, and he couldn't find a job. So he was like, you know what? No one's writing about City Hall. I'll just start writing articles about City Hall. And so he's become extremely wide read, both in Springfield and people in Boston, I think, kind of read it to figure out what's really going on in Springfield. And he had, like in all of his candidate profiles, starting from kind of 07, 08, which is coincidentally when he started doing this, there were like 3 votes, right, that were included. Like, how did these people vote on these 3 things? And the 3 things were like, this controversial budget override, an important kind of community policing piece, and biomass. Biomass was like the 3rd thing, was how, so when you wanted to know what a candidate was doing, you wanted to know, did they support overturning the biomass special permit, right? And what was their original vote on biomass? So it's become such a toxic issue in Springfield for politicians that there are still a few people on the council who were there originally that voted for it, who are now, we've had to bring other votes before them for appeals and for hiring counsel and for all sorts of things that they have now supported. And they're like at debates being like, we support, Councilor Letterman's motion on the biomass appeal. And it's like, well, 10 years ago, but that's how far it's come, that it's completely, unacceptable. And that's what you have to make it in your community. So Arise certainly never did any electioneering, never did any endorsements, never did anything like that. But they did bring it to the forefront of the issue. And the other thing I think sometimes that folks will do is they'll do forums or scorecards or
Yes.
something like that to say, ask, find out where people stand on this. We're not telling you what to do, but we're telling you Rise never did this, but you can go out and say, ask people these questions, ask them where they stand on this.
One thing as you talk about Arise and its 501c3 status, and I spent some time looking this afternoon about your campaign online, and just this incredible collection of images of art, and just all the ways that people express themselves on this. It was super, super impressive. One of the things that I saw is that, they have the ability to get people together. Tell me a little bit about data and how you reach those people. Did you have a database? How would organizers at Arise go out and find these people to show up for these things?
Yeah. So Arise always had a pretty strong base of just kind of membership, right? I mean, it was a member-led organization. So if you were working with Arise, you were a member, right? And Arise is an interesting organization, and it would be great if maybe it's somebody, I don't know if you guys all know Tanisha Arena, who was Michael Ambusi's successor and is currently the executive director of Arise. She's done a really wonderful job. But Arise does a lot of support of people in the community on different issues, whether that is housing issues, criminal justice issues, public health issues. So people come to Arise for help. It's sort of a catch-all, right? I mean, when I was working there, I was working on environmental issues, but it was very interesting how many state agencies referred people to Arise for social justice, because they knew that the folks at Arise understood the state systems really well and could work kind of in a little bit more of a creative way than they could to get people what they needed. But the way that they leveraged that was to say, listen, we're not here to help you. We're here to help you help yourself, right? And so we'll give you all the tools that you need to solve this issue. But after that, let's stay connected about how you can uplift your community. And so that's how they've always grown their base. And then on this issue, like I said, it kind of took on, it really took on a life of its own because the coalition grew so much. And so I think coalition building is a really important part of this, and not saying that everybody has to join your organization or follow you as the leader, but to basically build a table that people can come to and be leaders around. We replicated that at Arise. When I joined, when I joined as the environmental organizer, which is not a role I hold anymore, but we started convening the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition because we wanted to go broader than Stop Toxic Incineration in Springfield, right? And so we grew the Climate Justice Coalition to 60 organizations, and that gave us access to their membership. And our argument was hey, the environmental work is tied to what you are doing, even if it is not the main thing that you are doing. So why don't you join our coalition and back us up when we call upon you to come work with us? And so, we had membership all the way from those same neighborhood councils, right, to the local NAACP chapter, to, the Massachusetts, Springfield chapter of the Massachusetts Medical Society. And so you grow who you are able to connect with in that way. So I'm a big fan of coalition building, as diverse as your coalition can be, as many people, as many organizations. And that takes some pressure off of them to feel like they have to have this whole division dedicated to this work when they know that they can work with you and rely on it. Now, that does require you to build a certain level of trust in the community to be trusted as a convener of that. And Arise was in a unique position, having already existed for 30 years at that point and having won major victories against the city and the state and the powers that be. So they sort of walked into it with a lot of credibility. So you do have to build that credibility, but it doesn't have to take 30 years. So, that's the question.
Totally. I hope you guys are taking notes on this. Coalitions, there is a message that you get in school, right? That, if I get an A, this other person is going to get a B or whatever, like some competitive bullshit that we sort of cultivate in our culture. Actually, when you build coalitions, everybody can win. When you work together. And it's an incredible experience to be able to go in there and say, man, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light got together with Minnesota 350 and Honor the Earth and, all of these native camps, and all of us are going to rise this boat together. And I work in Minnesota on the Line 3 resistance movement. So it's a, sad we lose and then we win and then we lose and then we win situation. But it's um, when you're in it for the long run, having good allies is like the only way to do it. And so yeah, it's super, super important. Fred, I'm gonna let you have the last word because I bet you're ready for supper, and well, I suppose it's way late in Massachusetts over there, but this was absolutely inspirational.
Well, just to see, does anybody else have any final questions for Jesse?
Yeah, I would love if you could talk a little bit more about how you spoke a little bit about this, but how you made the biomass the issue in Springfield, especially compared to more like immediate material issues in the community.
I think it goes back to, like I was saying before, connecting it to the immediate issues, which in this case was the asthma rate, right? So people they just could connect with that on a pretty deep level. People also have a pretty strong and probably probably justified distrust of elected officials. And so the fact that, and one of my goals is, of course, to help people see that there are folks who are really working hard for them, but you have to earn that, right? And I think in too many communities that is not the case. And so I think the sort of backroom deal nature of it, the campaign finance nature of it, the idea that people were basically, going to get rich at your expense, and the people that represented you were sort of also getting rich in a way from it, was really motivating for people. So again, you just have to find a way to connect it to people's lives in a way that they are already familiar with, I think, if that makes sense. And I'll give you an example, right? So like there's a big discussion in Springfield right now on this pipeline extension or this second source of gas through a pipeline that Eversource wants to build. And a lot of the same people who worked on biomass are working on that campaign, and they are not necessarily seeing the same like immediate reaction from the community that they saw, because that's a little disconnected, right? Like you have to have a broader conversation about gas infrastructure and why you might want to be phasing off of gas infrastructure and why that's important to the overall climate conversation. And that, you can't just walk into the room and say, who here has an issue directly impacted by this proposed gas pipeline, right? So that's one of the things that we have to, do in terms of the capacity building, is help people realize the broader threat that exists and how it's all connected. And it's not an easy task, for sure. But one of the ways we've tried to do it in Springfield is by moving the issues kind of front and center. So like when I got elected, we introduced a rules change to create a climate and sustainability, or environment and sustainability standing subcommittee of the Springfield City Council. So historically, for like 50 years, there were like 7 committees, and it was public safety, health and human services, maintenance and development, economic development, these things that you normally would think of. And we said, well, climate change is, up there top 3 threats facing our society right now. In Springfield, it's getting hotter every summer. You're opening cooling centers. You have the oldest housing stock in the state. They do not have central air. People are actually going to die as it continues to get hotter. You should probably have a committee about this. And so now, climate issues are front and center on the council's agenda, no matter who's there, because it's in the laws of the city. You have to have a climate and sustainability committee on the city council. So you got to build it into the sort of societal response, as opposed to having it be issue by issue based, if that makes sense. That's a very long answer to your question, but I hope it helps.
A couple of things. There's a wonderful article by this woman named Danella Meadows, who taught for a long time at Dartmouth, and she recently passed away. But her book is called Thinking in Systems, and she wrote a book called Places to Intervene in a System. And she has a set of rules, like how do you actually, if you want to make change, what are the levers that you can push to be able to make change? And one of the more sort of effective and high level levers is to actually change the rules of the system, like who gets to speak, who gets to right, rather than just changing the subsidies or the taxes or the permissions in this one place, right? If instead you can create a whole new committee, you can be basically change the narrative. The other thing that she says is that you can be really effective at changing a system by increasing the feedback. That if people are able to see and understand what the impact of something is, that the chance will be much higher that you can make change. And so I can see that that obviously played really well. And I just turned on my professor voice, so I apologize for getting too heady about this, but y'all should totally check out Thinking in Systems. Here it is. You've just been like, it's like your life is this book, Jesse.
At this point, we probably could write a book, but it was really great to be with you all. I really appreciated, getting to talk with you and share our experiences. I'm going to put my direct contact info into the chat, so all of you can really feel free to contact me anytime, or if you want to follow our website, you can follow everything that we're doing there, and don't hesitate to be in touch.
Jesse, your story is so inspiring, and I'm just high as a kite listening to you and getting a sense of what's possible, because you as you said, your opposition just kept morphing into other forms and coming back, and so many occasions where you could have been discouraged, and you kept at it, and you won. And so it's these success stories that remind us of what's possible. I'm so grateful for your being here. You mentioned a Partnership for Policy Integrity, Mary Booth. Her colleague Laura Height is going to be our guest next Tuesday. You mentioned that although it looked like the Palmer plant is dead, knock on wood, so to speak, knock on wood chips, in Springfield, that biomass is still, the Baker administration is still trying to give biomass, credit and subsidies in other contexts, and Laura is going to help us get active and actually in real time contact our legislators in support of legislation that would permanently exclude biomass from the renewable portfolio standard.
And Fred, a lot of that is behind too, is that they got friends up in Maine who are burdened a lot, and they know they can get paid, and that's what that's about. And Laura
exactly
has been really invaluable. I forgot to say the most important thing is that you should all run for office. It is not as hard as they want you to believe that it is. So please consider that, and please contact me if you would like to do that, because I'm happy to talk about it. And I will say that as these issues become more front and center in people's lives, as summers get hotter and winters get colder and extreme weather events become the norm, backgrounds in this type of work are going to become important in those contexts. And when I announced the year that I won, when I announced in 2017 when I announced my candidacy, there was a headline, and the headline was "Environmentalist Jesse Lederman announces candidacy for city council." And a really well-known political consultant who is a friend of mine calls me and goes, "This is horrible that was the headline. You do so much more than just your environmental work, and now you're going to be pegged as this environmentalist." And we won that election, right? And I sent him the screenshot of what he had said to me that night to him on election night, and said, "I guess it worked." So if you do run, don't run from this work, right? Run with this work, and it will work. So really, I'm serious about that. Run for office.
Well,
all right, guys.
Model.
Thank you
Good
so much.
night. Good night. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was incredible. Let me just say that over the next, we are not going to be able to do all the material. So Carissa, you and I can plan on the fly here. I think that we should plan to do some of the material about team building next week. And I guess I'd love to bring it back to the SMART goals diagram and the organizing sentence, and just think briefly from the perspective of Jesse Lederman what those might have looked like. Hold on, let's get those back.
I can screen share if you want.
Sure, do that. So who are they organizing? Just yell it out.
Everybody.
Everybody, yeah. The people of Springfield, right?
Yeah.
And the people who cared about Springfield. So the coalition wasn't just that one town. it was people who cared about biomass as well. To pursue what vision? They wanted to stop the biomass, but I'm going to put that down in the strategic goal.
Protect public health.
Yeah, there you go. Well, like their vision is a world in which a community can not have asthma. So it's really important to separate out the goal and the vision when you're sort of thinking about things. Theory of change. You know, it's interesting. It's like, you know, they went through this campaign for, you know, over a decade. Or, you know, because it wasn't one campaign, it was like going from one thing to another. They didn't have a choice. This wasn't like, let's sit down and plan a campaign, right? It was, what's the next thing that we have to do to continue to keep this goal front and center? But the theory of change is that people advocating for what they need and making sure that at the state and the local level that you know moratoriums are put in place, that every sort of political policy opportunity to protect people is available. So you know each of the micro campaigns maybe had a different target, right? The state versus the you know city council of Springfield, etc. But the theory of change was the same, that they were going to bring the voice of the people to the decision makers so that they could make it clear that you know people making money was not more important than people's health. And by when
does the theory of change fall under believing that democracy can work if enough people participate?
Yeah,
totally,
because I'd just say super quick. I mean, their theory of change could have been like, we're gonna blow it up if it gets built, you know, and our theory of change is democracy won't work and we're gonna have to take it into our own hands or something. Sorry.
totally, their theory of change could have been, we're going to divest from these companies. We're going to get people across the state to divest from that company. Their theory of change could have been to raise enough money to buy that piece of land. What else could they have done? First, their okay, and by when, of course, you know, in each case they had to defeat it before it was built. Very specific. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Carissa, and keep going down. Okay, so just real quick, specific, measurable, activating. I just want to stress, you know, he talked about all of those people who came out again and again and again. Every one of those people who signed up with Arise has their name in a database. And Fred was talking about how next week we're inviting you to bring other people into this session to hear from the next speaker, also on renewable energy and biomass, right? And our goal in that case is for us as a class to bring how many people? Actually, let me move past this quickly and well, it's 7:53. Let's see about this. Will you, Carissa, just keep going through the slides? We'll skip this one for now. I think we've done enough on this. Yeah.
Should we just go to the next steps
Um,
for the next week?
I would like to talk about this, and then I want to go back to the diagram of SMART goals and stuff. So next week, we have given you some practice on telling your own story. We've asked you to go do one-to-ones. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about how to structure some teams. So you'll have a little bit on that. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that. If not, we'll send you some good material on it. Actually, Carissa, will you go to that, to the bicycle for a second? I want to mention this slide before we move on. Arise was out there providing the structure that people needed in Springfield in order to have the narrative, right, which is that people, deserve to be healthy, right, and that people were having asthma, and this power plant was threatening them, right, with the strategy, which was they were going to reach these city council people, or they were going to reach these legislators or whatever. That's the way that this bicycle of the campaign is going to run along. I think these faces are sort of creepy, but this is a picture that I didn't make. Um, but but in between the narrative and the strategy, you actually have to have a frame of the bicycle, and you've got to have a frame that makes it possible for everybody to wheel the bike in the same relationship or in the same direction, right? The commitments and the bicycle wheels, right? People are committed. They're going to keep coming because they care about their kids with asthma. They're going to keep coming because they believe in the strategy. And what keeps them together is the relationships between people who are doing things. They trust each other. They've built a relationship container that feels productive and worth their while. Part of the way you're going to do that is by making sure you don't lose people's contact information, etc. So now go to the next slide, Carissa. No, the last one about the last. Yeah, there we go. So your job is to invite some folks to come and join you next week at Be the Spark, because as a class, we are hoping you will.
Oops,
Sorry,
sorry.
I got muted. So we are hoping that you will bring, one or two people in your community that you have gotten to know that you think would care about this. There is going to be a statewide campaign to make sure that what happened in Springfield doesn't happen anywhere else in Massachusetts. And the way that you all are going to do this is by joining a campaign that asks the legislature to say renewable energy cannot, or biomass cannot be classified as renewable energy in the state carbon or the state renewable energy standards. So we're going to learn next week from Fred. Who is it who's coming? You want to say a word?
Laura Height. I'm not sure of her exact title. She's something like Advocacy Director for Partnership for Policy Integrity, which probably knows more about biomass than anybody. And she will tell us more about this legislation and how we can help get it passed.
Yep. And so we're going to, what I would love to do is we're going to spend a few minutes together before we invite our invited guests and our speaker in next week. But the goal, my goal, Fred and Carissa and I have gotten together with a goal of having at least 30 people come to our session next week. So that means each of you needs to invite at least one person to join you. We are going to listen to Molly Height, and we're gonna, is that right?
Laura.
Yeah, sorry. And we are gonna aim to have 30 people signing this petition of that asks each of their individual legislators to make sure that they vote to have the biomass not count as renewable energy. It's just a little micro campaign. We're trying to give you a flavor of it. But one of the things we have done is we've created a petition, and I'll put these links all in the chat. You can look at that. Clearly, if we were really a team working on this, we would together figure out what the tools were and stuff like that. But what we're trying to do is illustrate some tactics that you can then take into campaigns in your own place. And that you can also use in the faith and action campaigns as they roll out in the next couple of years. So please get people to RSVP. Carissa, if you want to just cut and paste, I guess I can do this instead. We'll cut and paste this in the chat so you have this, and this will also be in your follow-up email from us, which we can send to you probably no later than tomorrow morning. In order to be able to invite people to come and join you. What time are they to invite their people, Fred, next week?
7:30 to 8:30.
7:30 to 8:30.
And I'll just say, here's a little pop quiz as we close, since it's 7:59. What is one tactic you can use to invite a friend or neighbor to come next week? How could you get that person interested and make the ask?
One-to-ones, woohoo.
Oh, you gave it away, but yes, having a one-to-one.
Well, it's kind of easy because a lot of us have been working on the Springfield Palmer plant. So this will be just the next step for people who are already committed to that.
Exactly. And you know, you can see now that Jesse is just a tremendous speaker. You can imagine how you might want to invite him back. We're just trying to wet people's whistle on this campaign so that you all can get organized as you move forward. And I think that's about what we got. You want to go to the evaluation slide? Yeah, can you type in the chat? You know, something that you really stuck with you from tonight, something that was positive, something that maybe you'd want to change. So just take a moment to do that in the chat for us.
I'll say, as folks are heading out, obviously you have a recording you can check out too. It'd be great to throw in the chat. But you know, if you have friends or whoever who've been really involved, that'd be super easy asks, and that's great. But maybe if you have a family member or someone in your congregation who cares about climate but maybe hasn't been involved, they could be a good person to have, you know, get coffee with or have a one-to-one with or whatever. Yes, I see folks are heading out. So thanks so much. Hopefully you can leave a little comment as you head out, but feel free to pop off and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody. And thanks for your attention to this evaluation.
Yes, agreed. Jesse was definitely inspiring. All right, I'll close us out. Okay, bye. Thanks.